Hi Cobb, so let's do a short video here on the shutdown rules. There's going to be a shutdown rule for the short run and also a shutdown rule for the long run. But before we dive into the shutdown, let's just take a look at this picture and make sure we understand everything that's on it. Okay, so the first thing I want you to take a look at is this line here. It's marked AR for average revenue. That is also another way of saying it's the demand curve. And from the demand curve, or the average revenue curve, we could derive the marginal revenue curve, which is essentially the demand curve with twice the slope. Okay, so now take a look at this curve, which is the marginal cost curve. That's the the cost of producing one additional. And we know universally that the profit maximizing point is where the marginal cost curve equals the marginal revenue curve. And let's just think about why that would be for a second. So if you're in this area here, so you're before the quantity one, you see that your marginal cost, the cost of making it, is some price that's lower than the marginal revenue. So of course, marginal revenue being greater, you make a profit. So there's an incentive, a profit incentive, to continue to make more. And then if you're in this region where the marginal cost is actually greater than your revenue, what you get for it, you lose. So for every additional piece here, you lose money. For every additional piece here, you make money. And that's why you go to where they're equal. Okay, let's turn our attention to this line here, which is the average variable cost. And there's a few interesting things that we noticed about the average variable cost. And one is that we see that the marginal cost curve intersects the average cost curve right at the bottom where the slope is 0. And we've also seen in a number of questions that as long as the marginal cost, right, is less than the average cost, right, so what you're adding, each additional one, is less than the average keeps dropping. I guess another way of saying that is that as you add more and more to the average, if you're adding it at a lower and lower price, the average keeps falling. And conversely, as soon as the marginal cost goes above the average cost, it's going to start bringing your average up. And the average cost is all your cost, but well, it's not all your cost, it's the cost without the fixed costs, right? So it's only the cost that you need, like labor and supplies, to make a product. It has nothing to do with the fixed costs. All right, so that brings us to the last line on here, which is the average cost curve. And I see this as just average cost, but we'll also see this written as average total cost curve. They are the same. The difference between the average total cost curve, the one we're looking at here, and the average variable cost is that we're just adding in the fixed costs. Okay, so now let's take a look at profits. How do we get profits from this curve? So the economic profits are what you take in, right? So if you're making Q1, you're taking in this point here, so P1 of revenue. And then when you do profits, now profits is not variable cost, profits is total cost, right? So our total cost is up here. So this is a huge loss. So this quantity between C1 and P1 is your total loss. I'm going to call that the loss per piece is the P1 minus C1. And if you want to know the total loss, you would just multiply that by the quantity Q1. Okay, and then there's one other interesting point on here, which is of course, the amount that you're taking in to the average variable cost, right? So we're talking about this difference here. And in this case, this is your profit or loss. In this case, it's a loss because P1 is actually less than P2 of just making the 100 pieces with not taking the fixed costs into consideration. Okay, so let's talk about shutdown price in the short run. Okay, so in the short run, we just don't take fixed cost into consideration. And if we don't take fixed cost into consideration, we're only worried about the average variable cost curve and the demand curve, or the average revenue curve. So in this case, we could see that there's actually a loss at the profit maximizing quantity. So taking the fixed costs out of the equation and just taking a look at the cost of making 100 pieces, it's higher than we're going to get for the 100 pieces. So should I make the 100 pieces? And the answer here is no, we should not make the 100 pieces. So in this graph, the way it's drawn, the shutdown point is already been achieved. We should shut down. So the decision to do it is when your average cost is greater than your average revenue. Okay, so that's it for the short run. Let's take a look about shutdown in the long run. Okay, so why would they be different? Well, first of all, the shutdown in the short run short run, anything could happen. There could be market disruptions or hope that things will change. In the long run, things aren't changing. Things have played themselves out, and you're not expecting any additional changes in the long run. So here, we definitely need to take fixed cost into consideration. And the question we have to ask ourselves is that, do we make profit overall if we stay in business in the long run? So here, we're going to be looking at the average total cost, And if the average total cost in the long run is less than the amount that we take in, it's a shutdown situation. Okay, hope that cleared some things up.